Welcome to my brew day. So today's the day, and I am actually at the site of where it's all going to happen, my brew deck. And you will see behind me some of the equipment that I'll be using to brew my beer at home. To begin, I'd like to introduce my co-hosts. This is Reggie and Mobby. They will be definitely in and out of many shots today. And you will notice that my system is actually set up on a 2-burner camp stove. There's that guy run by propane. You can see the tank there. And on top of that stove is my magical brew kettle. So what I've got here is I have a 10-gallon kettle. Ideally, between 7 to 10 gallons is perfect for a 5-gallon batch of beer. So they do come in various sizes. But again, this is something you can pick up at the general store or your local homebrew supply store or even online. Inside of this, I will lift the lid in a second. You'll see that we have a colander, and here's why. So what I've done is I put a colander in the bottom of my brew kettle, and that is because I'm going to be doing a brew in a bag process. What that means is I'll be brewing my beer in this fine mesh bag. So this is just a nylon mesh bag. Once again, picked it up at the general store. And instead of just putting my grains right into the kettle, I'm going to contain them in this bag. And in order to prevent the bag from hitting the bottom of the kettle and scorching, the colander. MacGyver number 1. Another MacGyver method for me. So once I'm done mashing and having, all the grains are going to be in the pot for about an hour, held at about 150 degrees. And every recipe is different, so don't go by that with the recipe that you choose to brew. But mine will be at 150 degrees. And once it's done mashing, I want to get as much of that sugary water out of the grain as possible. So I'm going to be lifting the bag and putting this grate from my camp stove over the top of the kettle. Like so. And that way I can just set the bag of grain on top and let it drip and just let all of the liquid get out of it as much as possible. The idea is not to squeeze the bag, but just to kind of let it do its own thing before you head into the boil phase. Now on a serious note, brewing beer is very scientific. So we have some very sciencey things, pieces of equipment that are very, very sciencey that we're going to be using to make sure that our beer turns out. First, a thermometer. Second, a hydrometer. They sound the same, but they do 2 totally different things. And I'm actually going to call the general store because I have no idea what a hydrometer does, but I think they're going to be able to tell me.
Thanks for calling Bell's General Store. This is Dylan.
Hey Dylan, this is Shelly. How are ya?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. I'm actually brewing my very first batch of beer at home, and I have a question for you. Do you have a second?
I do.
Okay. So I'm reading through all my instructions, and I have this thing called a hydrometer that I'm supposed to use to measure gravity. But can you please explain to me what gravity is?
Yeah, so your gravity is going to be the amount of sugar that's in the beer. So what you're going to do is you're going to use the hydrometer and put it in there, and it's going to float higher the more dense the liquid is and how the more sugars there are in it. So you'll take your gravity before you ferment, and then afterwards you'll take your gravity once you've fermented and the yeast have eaten all the sugars, and then your hydrometer will sink a little bit lower, and the difference between those 2 numbers will give you how much alcohol is in your beer.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you. Can I give you a call back if I have another question?
Absolutely, anytime.
All right, have a good one.
Thank you, too.
Bye.
Bye.
Couple of other tools that you're going to need. You are going to need a mash paddle. So this is my mash paddle. However, you can use a giant plastic spoon, but it should be deep enough to exceed the depth of your pot. So make sure that you have that. And then how do we transfer this liquid in here into our fermenter? Well, vinyl tubing. Your friend, the vinyl tube. That will come in handy. I want to take just a minute before we get started to talk about safety. At Bell's, we are a safety always culture, and it wouldn't be right for me to not discuss some of the potential dangers in brewing, although it's pretty user-friendly. But number one, it's hot. I got my hot pad. I'm ready for anything in terms of picking up a hot kettle. Also want to point out that's a big kettle, and that kettle right there is going to require the assistance of another person. So although I'm brewing this by myself 100%, I'm going to enlist the help of my son to help me lift it off the burner. And then finally, open flame, like really open, so don't leave it unattended. Stay with your stove, whatever heat source you have at all times. And I'm sure I'm going to come up against something else that's going to be a definite stop and mention safety moment, but we'll just kind of cross that bridge when we get there. So before I get started brewing today, I would like to just go over a little bit about some of the ingredients that go into brewing beer. 4 ingredients. We've got water, malt, which is actually barley that's gone through the process of malting, hops, and yeast. The first ingredient I want to talk about is water. So water, as simple as it seems, is actually just as much of a contributing factor to how a beer is going to taste as any of the other ingredients. If you think about it, when you travel, water tastes different than it does coming straight out of the tap than it does coming out of your home tap. And that's okay. It's actually what makes each region unique in what it produces in terms of wine, beer, and other agricultural products. And that has everything to do with the terroir, or the natural environment of the region in which that item is produced. So soil, climate, topography, those are all contributing factors to the minerality of how water tastes. So after it rains or when the snow melts, all that water is going to trickle down through layers of different sediment, rock, clay, silt, sand, before it makes its way into the aquifer. And it's from the aquifer that we draw our drinking water. Our tap water can sometimes be treated, especially at home. We may use a water softener to treat our water, which is why today I'm going to be filling mine straight out of the spigot in my backyard. Okay, I am outside. I am getting ready to fill my kettle, my brand new friend. Hello, new friend. We're gonna have some fun today. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put about 7 or 8 gallons in this 10-gallon kettle. And that's because once I get it to a boil, I'm gonna be boiling some off, and I wanna end up with a 5-gallon batch of beer. So plenty of water will go in here, and let's get started. Turn my water on. Let it go for a minute. I don't want any bugs in my beer. I don't know what's been living in this hose. Might as well spray my dogs while I'm at it. Go, go. Okay. All right. In she goes. So while this is filling, just kind of briefly go over a little bit about ingredient number 2. Basically, once I bring this water to a boil and I cool it down to the right temp, I'm going to be putting my grain in. And my grain is going to consist of the flaked oats and also of that ginormous, twice the size of my head, bag of various malts. So what malt is actually barley that's gone through the process of malting. And a maltster is the organization or the person that is in charge of creating, probably about 400 different varieties of malt exist, of creating all those different flavors. Malt's going to contribute to the color, the mouthfeel, and the flavors, aromas of your beer. Hang on just a minute, this is almost full. But basically, a maltster is taking the barley, and it is basically they're going to expose it to various degrees of temperature over different amounts or lengths of time, and also introducing water to the grain itself after it's been harvested and it reaches the maltster, they're going to soak that grain, and then it's going to be a matter of temperature and for how long, and they can roast it. They can be roasted, it can be kiln dried. There's just various processes for it. So in total about 400 different varieties of malt, so it gives a brewer a ton of choices to have to make when it comes to recipe development. But for me, I'm sticking with my kit today, so I will be simply tossing in the big giant bag that's twice the size of my head and just letting it go. My strike water is right around 163, and ideally we want it between 158 and 162 Fahrenheit. So I'm getting ready to mash in. Here we go. We are mashing, and it appears that we have a little bit of wait time. Pretty good at waiting. So I'm just gonna hang out here and swing, do a little swinging. I think we have like 60 minutes. I'm just gonna wait. A watched pot never boils. It's a good thing I'm not watching it. Don't want that to happen. Gotta hold it right around 150 degrees for as long as possible. It's gonna naturally cool off over time, so while that's happening, we're just gonna hang out and wait. I decided to make a sandwich. Here is my kettle after the mash. You can see that I have my bag of grain sitting on my camp stove grate, and I'm just kind of letting all of the good sugary liquid that's inside of the grain bag drip into the kettle so I can get as much of it as possible for my brew. I did end up wrapping my kettle in a packing blanket during the mash, only because I was afraid that with the temperatures out today, it's kind of been spitting and snowing, and the weather doesn't know what it wants to do. So I wanted to make sure that it held temperature, and sure enough, it looks to have stayed right in the range that I wanted it to for the entire mash, which is great. Well, it is getting a little chilly out, so I put another layer on. Reggie over here is helping me out by keeping an eye on the boil kettle. We are officially boiling, and we're waiting for it to get to a boil. And once it does, then our beer calls for a 1 hour boil. I think you'll find that some recipes are different just depending upon the style or the type of beer that you're brewing. But we're going to boil for 1 hour, and we actually don't add our hops until we turn the flame out. So flame out and add our hops. Stay tuned. As I wait For the wort to come to a boil, I have hidden the spent grain under the table in the blue tub, and Reggie is keeping guard. I promised him we will make some tasty spent grain dog treats before this is over. What you got in the blue bowl? What's in the blue bowl? Are those going to be made into dog treats? Reggie, are they going to be made into dog treats? Oh boy. Oberon? Two-hearted? Official. 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 Now, isn't that a pretty sight? Check that out. We're boiling. She's like a freight train coming down the tracks. So I am starting my boil right now and starting my timer for 60 minutes. We'll be back. It's officially time to treat myself to a beer. Cheers. Okay, so with about 10 minutes left on our boil, it's time to add my tangerine peel, which is going to give this beer just a little bit of Shelly flair. So here we go. Still boiling. It is such a beautiful day outside, so I thought I would step out to my garden where things grow to talk to you a little bit about hops and how they grow. There are currently a little over 100 different varieties of hops in the world, and hops are similar to grapes. They like to grow in the same region, and they also grow on a vine-like thing called a bine. Hops start as a rhizome, so it's planted underground, and from the roots comes a wonderful shoot that can grow pretty quickly. In fact, about a foot a day. You can almost put a camera on it and see it grow. Hops add a lot of different types of flavors to beer. Everything from earthy, grassy, herbal to floral, citrus, piney. I really prefer the hops, the citrusy hops that we're going to find in Official. And hops can be added to your beer in a variety of different times and different ways. We're going to do a combination with this beer. We're going to start by adding it to the boil and pretty much right at flame out when we're just about done boiling. And that's because when you add the hops at the beginning of the boil, you actually boil off a lot of the flavor and aroma. And because Official is so flavor forward in terms of the hop that it presents, we want to add that closer to the end and then again in dry hopping. Okay, so now we have finished our boil. I'm going to turn the flame out on this sucker. And it is time for us to add our hops. So first up, Mosaic. Make sure you get them all. Then we have El Dorado. Then we have Amarillo. And finally, Azaka. Okay, take a peek inside that kettle and see what we're looking at there. Super green, smells wonderful. Okay, I'm going to give it a stir here. Let me grab my mash paddle. In between the mashing and the boil, I did another cleanse and sanitize of everything, including this mash paddle. So we're just going to give it a stir. And then pretty much all we have to do is chill it. So I'm going to put the lid back on it, and then I'm going to have my trusty cameraman turn his camera off so he can help me lift this sucker. Okay, time to add our wort chiller to the wort. I turned my hose on. It is flowing. Lift it up and over. basically we're just gonna let it sit there and do its thing. I'm gonna cover it so it can do its thing. Good to go. Check back with you shortly. Okay, so as you can see, we are siphoning the wort from our kettle into our fermenter. And ideally you want to have some motion going on down there. You want to really aerate that wort because our yeast is going to need some air in there in order to be able to survive. Time to work the hydrometer. All right, I'm going to let it bob here for just a few minutes. Once it comes to a resting point, I will take a reading from it, but I have to do some math here because I am actually at about 82 to 84 degrees right now, and so it's a little higher than when you normally should be taking your gravity reading at somewhere in the 60 degree plus or minus 5 degrees mark. So I'm going to hit it with some math, and then once it cools to 72-ish, we will begin to pitch our yeast. Okay, so now it's time to pitch our yeast. Here we are. Kind of goopy and thick. There we go. There we go. Okay, that's it for today, friends. So keep an eye on me. I will be back. I will be ready to add my dry hop, my first dry hop on Saturday. So for me, that's Saturday. I don't know when you're going to see this, but in 3 days from now, I'll be doing that. And hopefully we'll have some bubble action on our little airlock. But I'm super excited. It was a great day. A little chilly outside, but hey, we did it. Okay? Talk to you soon.